What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. When it comes to solo queue, there's just so many champions that happen to have a ridiculous ban rate that it can be hard when you're trying to find a new character to main. But recently I've been having a lot of success with Xin Zhao jungle on stream, and I do think he's actually a pretty insane pick for solo queue right now, and happens to have an incredibly low ban rate and isn't that likely to get nerfed either. Let's get started. First off, he has really good sustain, especially in his first clear of the jungle, and this is really big since it allows you to gank immediately after your first clear, or you can even leave the jungle during your first clear to go gank. Whereas honestly 75% of the junglers in the game are cemented into that path of doing their first clear, backing, and then looking for ganks, and would honestly have a rough time ganking with more than half HP before minute 6 or so, and a lot of players are going to disrespect the jungler completely in the early game since they don't expect to be ganked right after the first clear, since most junglers just aren't able to do that. So you can quite commonly pull off a lot of first bloods and get the snowball rolling pretty hard. In addition, he's also one of the only junglers to have ganks that are pre-6 but are not skill shot reliant. So many junglers that have the ability to gank pre-6 do so via a skill shot. Gragas, Vi, Skarner, Jarvan, Lee Sin, so many junglers rely completely on a skill shot for any early ganks, but Xin Zhao has a targeted gap closer and a targeted knockup, which makes him very easy to play in terms of ganking. And because he has two crowd control abilities that are targeted, he has a ton of stick potential, and his damage is pretty strong too. And so this lets you solo kill a lot of targets from full health, especially these squishy laners that you might see in mid lane and sometimes top lane. And this is really powerful since players are just not going to expect junglers to be able to solo kill them from full health. But Xin Zhao's stick potential and damage really let him do that, so you can actually find a lot of advantages in 1v1 fights by just jumping in onto targets. Whenever the enemy laner gets forced out and the jungler comes to hold the lane, players expect the jungler to just have no chance of killing them because realistically most champions won't. But with Xin Zhao you can go hold the lane for an ally and still have the 1v1 potential to get a kill on the opponent and just run through the creeps and just go in. And I definitely find myself getting a lot of kills this way in my games, which again most junglers wouldn't be able to do, or at least they definitely wouldn't be able to do as easily as Xin Zhao does with his targeted abilities. And because of his bruiser style and crowd control, he has great skirmishes, meaning he's great in 2v2 or 3v3 fights, so counter ganks are super easy, and even when you get counter ganked, you can still win a lot of the time. And this makes your map pressure a lot more consistent than some other champions who might get totally wrecked if they get counter ganked, and you don't have to worry about it as much, and that's pretty powerful. However, he does fall off late game a tiny bit since he's significantly less tanky than other bruisers, and although his ult can give him a lot of defensive stats, it's not necessarily what you plan on using as a defensive tool in most of your fights. It's really something that you want to use to jump in on a target, isolate them, and try to pick them off, not really something that you use with the resistances in mind. So in the late game he can actually be a little bit easier to kill compared to other bruisers and tanks, but his passive actually allows you to do a nice job of focusing tanks, and his crowd control is still relevant, so his frontline presence is definitely still there. It's just not as crazy as you might expect from a jungler that has AoE crowd control in most team fights. But if your team has any assassins or any champions that like to dive in but maybe need someone to dive in first and initiate the fight for them, Xin Zhao's a really strong pick in that team composition because his ultimate lets you just run up, go in, and isolate a target, provided that they at least don't have any escape or that you can catch up to them somehow. Also, compared to other junglers, Xin Zhao's maybe not the most versatile champion. His early game is incredibly dominant, probably the best in the game right now for solo queue. But when you fall behind, it's kind of a lot like Lee Sin in a way. You still have some potential to find fights and make some crazy plays here and there with your ultimate, but it's definitely harder than it would be on a lot of champions, and you do have to start finding somewhat creative ways to win fights. But he still has enough initiation power and strength to where it's never going to be a burden in teamfights, and the early game power is so worth it because something as little as 2 more successful ganks than your opponent can decide the entire game, because there's just so much snowballing that goes on, and there's so many champions that get played commonly in solo queue that just go off if they get even just a 2-kill lead, that being able to win the early game often is going to decide the entire game outright. and Xin Zhao does it while being a lot easier to play than some of the other junglers, and that makes him a fantastic option for solo queue. So that's going to be it. Check out the streams, and thanks for watching.